A millionaire left his wife for an influencer, but she stole the spotlight in the VIP room he couldn't enter. Please leave your like and enjoy the story. In the electric heart of Miami, where skyscrapers gleam under the relentless Florida sun and the traffic hums like a restless orchestra, Victor Grayson adjusted his tie in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror that reflected not just his image, but the city he thought he ruled. At 47, Victor was a real estate titan, a man who'd built an empire of steel and glass with the precision of a chess master and the nerve of a gambler. His salt and pepper hair, slicked back with high-end pomade, and his custom-tailored suit, crafted by a New York designer, were extensions of his persona, flawless, untouchable, envied. Lounging on a sleek white leather couch behind him was Chloe Bennett, 25, a social media influencer whose online presence was as dazzling as the billboards advertising Victor's latest developments. Chloe, with her platinum blonde hair and a crimson dress that demanded attention, scrolled through her phone posting stories for her 2 million followers. "You look like you own the world," she said, eyes glued to her screen, her voice laced with a mix of flirtation and strategy. Victor smirked, straightening his cufflinks. "I don't just look like it, sweetheart, I am." He turned, eyeing her like she was as prized as the waterfront tower he'd just acquired on Brickell Avenue. Chloe was the trophy he'd flaunt tonight at the gala for the Horizon Hope Foundation, an event that drew Miami's elite: politicians, tech moguls, celebrities, and of course, Victor Grayson, the man who believed every door would swing open for him. The gala wasn't just a charity event. It was a stage where fortunes were paraded, deals were struck, and reputations were burnished or broken. The Horizon Hope Foundation, once a small outfit, had received an anonymous donation so massive it now set trends in the philanthropy world. No one knew the donor's identity, but whispers pointed to someone with deep connections and a sharp vision. Victor didn't care about the specifics. He just wanted to command the ballroom, Chloe on his arm, outshining everyone. He'd done it before years ago with his ex-wife Abigail Harper, a woman whose quiet grace once balanced his loud ambition. But to Victor, Abigail had grown stale. She poured herself into social causes, community centers, literacy programs, shelters for battered women, things he dismissed as trivial next to the glare of the spotlight. "You don't get it, Abigail," he'd snapped during their final fight before demanding a divorce. "The world doesn't run on good intentions, it runs on power." She'd stared at him, her hazel eyes cutting through him, and said, "You'll learn that power without purpose is just noise." He'd laughed it off then, but now as he prepped for the gala, her words lingered like a warning he'd chosen to ignore. The blacked-out Escalade pulled up to the Fontainebleau, a Miami Beach icon dripping in glamour. The valet, a kid with a nervous grin, rushed to open the door, and Victor, with a practiced flick, slipped him a $100 bill without a glance. Cameras were already in position, flashes popping like gunfire. Chloe stepped out with rehearsed poise, adjusting her dress and flashing a smile that was both an invitation and a dare. "Victor Grayson," a photographer shouted. "Chloe, over here." Victor lifted his chin, offering his signature half-smile, the one that had graced Forbes covers and condo ads. He was the man of the hour, or so he thought. The hotel's grand staircase, lit by chandeliers and framed by velvet ropes, felt like a red carpet for his triumphant entrance. Chloe squeezed his arm, whispering, "Let's make this night legendary." But at the top of the stairs, the mood shifted. A security guard, tall and stone-faced, with an earpiece and a clipboard, blocked their path. "Good evening, name please," he said, his voice hard as marble. Victor raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. "Victor Grayson, +1. The guard scanned the list, frowned, and looked again. "I'm sorry, sir, but your name isn't on the guest list." The air seemed to freeze. Chloe let out a nervous giggle, while Victor blinked, stunned. "There's a mistake. I'm Victor Grayson. I've been at this event for the last 7 years. The guard didn't budge. "I understand, sir, but you're not listed. This year's event is invite only. We can't admit anyone not registered." Victor stepped closer, his voice tightening. "Do you know who I am? I was personally invited by the Foundation's chair, Lawrence Brooks." The guard remained unmoved. "No invite, no entry, sir." Chloe, now visibly uneasy, tried to smooth things over. "It's probably a mix-up. Maybe there's another list. Sponsors, maybe." But the guard repeated with the patience of someone used to handling bloated egos, "Please, sir, Step aside so we don't delay other guests." Victor opened his mouth to argue, but then his eyes caught movement at the top of the staircase. There she was, Abigail, his ex-wife, in a midnight blue gown that seemed to drink in the ballroom's light. At 45, she was more commanding than ever. Her chestnut hair swept into an elegant updo, her face calm, but her eyes radiating a strength he'd never noticed before. She wasn't the woman who once stood quietly by his side. She was the star. Their gazes locked for a moment. Abigail didn't smile, didn't wave. She just tilted her head, a subtle gesture heavy with meaning, and turned, vanishing into the ballroom. The silence that followed was louder than words. Chloe tugged at Victor's arm. "What's going on, Vic? This is mortifying." He didn't answer. Something inside him cracked, a thin but deep fracture in the armor he'd built over years. The guard cleared his throat, polite but firm. "Sir, please clear the way." Defeated, Victor let Chloe pull him back down the stairs, the camera flashes now feeling like stabs. In the car, the silence was suffocating. Chloe, fuming, typed furiously on her phone, while Victor stared out the window, his reflection in the glass looking like a stranger's. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. And though he didn't yet know it, that moment was just the start of a fall he'd never imagined possible. The low hum of the Escalade's engine filled the awkward quiet inside the car as Miami's neon lights slid past the windows, oblivious to the storm brewing in Victor Grayson's mind. He stayed silent, his fingers tapping on the leather armrest, his gaze lost in the city that, until moments ago, seemed to bow to his will. Chloe, beside him, couldn't hide her frustration. She tossed her phone onto her lap with a dramatic huff, crossing her arms. "That was pathetic, Vic, pathetic. How do you let something like that happen? You're Victor Grayson, for God's sake." Her voice, usually silky for Instagram stories, was now sharp, slicing. Victor turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. "It wasn't a mistake, Chloe," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It was her." Chloe furrowed her brow, confused for a second before it clicked. "Her? You mean Abigail? Your ex?" She laughed, but it sounded forced, disbelieving. "You think she planned this? Like got your name yanked from the list just to embarrass you? Oh my God, Vic, that's paranoid." He didn't respond, but the clench of his jaw said it all. It wasn't paranoia, it was certainty. The image of Abigail at the top of the stairs, in that gown that seemed made for royalty, wouldn't leave him. The way she looked at him, not with anger or drama, but with a calm that was more powerful than any outburst. That slight tilt of her head, barely noticeable, wasn't a greeting. It was checkmate. Chloe kept talking, unaware of the weight settling on his shoulders. "If she really did that, it's petty, you know. Who does that, and why would she care? You moved on, she should too." Victor finally met her gaze, and there was something new in his eyes, a shadow Chloe didn't recognize. "You don't get it, Chloe. Abigail isn't like you, she doesn't need to shout to be heard." The words came out harsher than he meant, and Chloe fell silent, hurt, turning back to her phone as if a new post could erase the sting. When they reached Victor's penthouse, perched atop a glass tower in South Beach, the silence between them was almost tangible. The space was a shrine to excess, black marble walls, crystal chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, furniture designed by names Chloe lightly name-dropped in her sponsored posts. But that night, the luxury felt hollow, like a showroom without a soul. Chloe flung her purse onto a chair and headed straight for the bar, pouring herself a glass of rosé. "I'm not going to sit here moping over some stupid party," she said, more to herself than to him. "Tomorrow we'll hit something bigger, something that shows who you really are. I'll call my people." Victor, still clutching the car keys, just shook his head. "You don't get it, Chloe, it's not just a party." She rolled her eyes, but he didn't see. He was already walking to the balcony, where the city stretched out like a sea of lights. Holding a glass of bourbon, he looked down at the streets that once felt like his kingdom. Now they seemed distant, almost hostile. What happened on that staircase wasn't just a rejection. It was a message. Abigail hadn't just survived their divorce. She'd reinvented herself in a way he hadn't anticipated. While he drowned in Chloe's attention and the validation of flashbulbs, Abigail was building something bigger, something he couldn't yet define. And the worst part, she'd done it quietly, without scandals, without needing headlines. With that one tilt of her head, she'd reduced him to a supporting role in his own story. The next morning, Victor woke with a heaviness that wasn't just from the bourbon. He got up, slipped into a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's yearly rent, and headed to his office, determined to erase the humiliation of the night before. His first move was to call Lawrence Brooks, the chair of the Horizon Hope Foundation. Lawrence was an old ally, someone who'd flattered him over steak dinners and vintage wine. But the call went to voicemail. He tried again, twice, 3 times, until Lawrence's assistant picked up, her tone polite but icy. "Mr. Brooks is in a meeting and won't be available today. Can I take a message?" Victor hung up without a word. He reached out to other contacts. A lawyer on the foundation's board, a socialite who always knew the gossip. Nothing. No one called back. It was as if an invisible curtain had dropped between him and the world he thought he owned. Frustrated, he summoned his PR manager, a woman named Rachel who'd worked for him for years. "I want a statement," he said, his voice steady but with a quiver he hoped she didn't catch. "Say I chose not to attend the gala due to scheduling conflicts. Make it look like my decision." Rachel hesitated, a rare crack in her professionalism. "Victor, photos of you at the hotel entrance are already online. Gossip blogs are eating it up. I'm not sure this story will stick." He slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the quiet office. Rachel's words hit like a punch. He grabbed his phone and reluctantly searched the news. There it was. Victor Grayson denied entry at exclusive gala, the end of an era. The photo showed him and Chloe on the staircase, his face taut, her smile strained. And in another image, there was Abigail, beaming next to a congressman, toasting with a tech CEO, speaking on stage with a confidence he'd never associated with her. The article read, "Abigail Harper, now using her maiden name, is the new driving force behind the Horizon Hope Foundation, leading a transformation that's put the organization in the global spotlight." Victor powered off his phone and stared into space. Abigail hadn't just taken over the foundation, she'd shed his last name, erasing the final trace of their connection. He hadn't expected it to hurt so much. Not because he still loved her, he hadn't thought of her that way in years, but because somehow he'd always assumed she'd need him, that she'd forever be a footnote in his story. But she wasn't. She was Abigail Harper, and the world was starting to see it. That night he didn't go home. He stayed in the office, slumped in his leather chair, sifting through memories he'd buried. He remembered meeting Abigail at 30, she a sharp lawyer working on environmental causes, he a hungry entrepreneur chasing success. They'd been partners at first, her keen mind matching his boldness. But somewhere along the way, he started seeing her idealism as a burden, someone who cared more about non-profits than networking dinners. He'd left her because he thought she was holding him back. Now he was beginning to realize it might have been the other way around. While he chased parties and headlines, she built something real, something that didn't rely on flash or applause. And for the first time, Victor tasted the bitter sting of doubt. What if he'd made the wrong choice? What did you think so far? If you're loving this tale of twists and redemption, hit that like button to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Every like and sub helps us bring more stories like this, packed with emotion and surprises that'll shake you. Let's keep going. Miami's skyline, with its towers that never slept and its streets that thrummed like the pulse of a living beast, seemed to mock Victor Grayson that night. He stayed in his office until the early hours, his bourbon untouched on the mahogany desk, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning, the walls lined with Businessman of the Year awards and photos of him shaking hands with senators now felt like relics of a reign starting to crumble. Victor wasn't one for self-reflection. He'd built his fortune on action, snap decisions, and a confidence bordering on hubris. But for the first time in years, he found himself looking back, not with nostalgia, but with an unease he couldn't name. The image of Abigail on the gala stage, poised and powerful, wasn't just a memory. It was a wound. He tried calling Chloe, but she didn't pick up. She was probably at some club, posting stories with glittery filters to bury the embarrassment of the night before. He didn't blame her. Chloe was young, driven by the need to be seen, to be wanted. That's what drew him to her, her raw energy, her lack of baggage. But now as the city outside pulsed on, he saw that lightness as fragility. Chloe was a mirror for his vanity, not his core. And for the first time, he wondered if he even knew his own core. The next morning, Victor arrived at the office with dark circles barely hidden and a renewed resolve. He wasn't a man who surrendered. If Abigail wanted to play, he'd play too. He called Rachel, his PR manager, and issued clear orders. "I want an event. Something huge, bigger than the gala. A launch, a party, anything to put my name back on top." Rachel, ever professional, jotted it down, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Victor, maybe we should hold off. The gossip about the gala is still hot. A wrong move now could backfire." He cut her off, his voice sharp. "I don't wait, Rachel. I make things happen." She nodded, but as she left, Victor felt a hollowness his commands couldn't fill. He tried reaching Lawrence Brooks again, but got the same response. "Mr. Brooks is unavailable." Frustrated, he took matters into his own hands. He opened his laptop and dug into the Horizon Hope Foundation. What he found floored him. The foundation was no longer the modest operation it once was. Under Abigail Harper's leadership, it had become a powerhouse, with global partnerships, social impact projects featured in UN reports, and a donor network that included some of America's wealthiest. Abigail wasn't just a figurehead. She was the brains behind its transformation, the force that turned it into a beacon of change. And in every article, every photo, there she was, smiling with quiet confidence, speaking at events with an eloquence he'd never credited her with. In a video, she talked about empowering girls in underserved communities, her voice alive with a passion he didn't recognize. When had she become this? Or worse, when had he stopped seeing who she really was? The answer came in fragments, memories he'd buried under layers of ambition and self-aggrandizement. He recalled their early marriage when Abigail was still Abigail Harper, the environmental lawyer who challenged him over dinner debates. She had a brilliant mind, a knack for seeing the world not as it was, but as it could be. They were a team, or so he thought. But as his wealth grew, Victor began to view her idealism as a flaw. He wanted to shine, to be the center, and Abigail, with her focus on causes that didn't make headlines, seemed to dim his spotlight. He started staying out late, first with crucial meetings, then with events he claimed were vital for business. In truth, they were escapes, trendy lounges in Wynwood, dinners in penthouses where women like Chloe circled men like him, offering validation for attention. Abigail never confronted him outright. She just withdrew quietly, pouring herself into the non-profits he dismissed as hobbies. One night he came home at 2 a.m., his shirt collar smudged with lipstick. Abigail was in the living room, reviewing fundraising reports. "You reek of perfume," she said, not looking up. He chuckled, deflecting. "Jealous, Abby?" She finally met his gaze, and there was a sadness in her eyes he hadn't expected. "No, Victor." Tired. They didn't speak again that night, and something between them died, without fanfare. Now, in his office, Victor realized that tiredness wasn't weakness. It was Abigail shielding herself, preparing for something greater. He opened a drawer and found an old photo from a New Year's Eve in Key West years ago. Abigail was laughing, her hair tousled by the breeze, while he looked at her with a smile that felt real. He couldn't remember when he'd stopped smiling like that. The photo stayed in his hands for a long time until Rachel knocked. "Victor, I've got news. I secured a dinner with some investors tomorrow. It could help polish your image." He nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed to understand how Abigail had done it, how she'd gone from his shadow to the spotlight. And more crucially, he needed to know if there was still a place for him in the new world she was shaping. That night, he went to a smaller event, an art gallery opening in Coconut Grove, hoping to reclaim the glow he felt slipping away. Chloe was there, radiant as ever, but the looks he got were different. There was curiosity, yes, but also something he wasn't used to. Pity. An old acquaintance, a banker named Marcus, pulled him aside. "Heard about the gala, Vic? Rough night, huh? But honestly, no one's talking about you. They're all talking about her." Victor forced a smile, but inside, he burned. He was no longer the main topic. Abigail was. The next day, he took action. He hired a private investigator, not to tail her, but to map her connections. He wanted to know who backed her, who funded her projects, how she'd built this invisible empire. The investigator, a discreet man named Paul, delivered a preliminary report within days. "She's untouchable, Mr. Grayson. She's got allies in DC, international NGOs, even corporate heavyweights. And the kicker, she's not chasing the spotlight. Everything she does is calculated but low-key. Victor read the report page by page and felt something unexpected. Admiration. Abigail wasn't playing his game. She'd created her own, with rules he didn't grasp. And for the first time, he wondered if he could keep up. But keeping up meant challenging her, and challenging her meant admitting she was a worthy opponent. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Meanwhile, the cracks in his world widened. Chloe, sensing his shift in mood, started drifting away, accepting invites to events without him. The invitations for Victor, once flooding in, were now scarce. And in every silence, every unreturned call, he heard the echo of Abigail's tilt of the head, a gesture that said more than words. You don't run this show anymore. The weeks after the gala were a slow unraveling for Victor Grayson. Miami, with its frenetic vibe and stark contrasts, seemed to have turned its back on him. Invitations to events, once clogging his inbox, trickled in, and even those were for lesser affairs, low-key dinners or launches that didn't draw the press. He tried to keep up appearances, showing up in public with Chloe, who still shone as a rising star online, but the looks he got weren't admiration anymore. They were scrutiny, as if people were trying to puzzle out what had changed in the man who once owned any room. At the office, he buried himself in meetings, poring over contracts and planning new ventures, but even there, the vibe was off. His staff, once deferential, now seemed cautious, as if they sensed the ground beneath their boss wasn't as solid as before. Victor noticed it all but refused to admit it. He was Victor Grayson, the man who turned empty lots into skyscrapers, who sealed deals with a handshake and a grin. He didn't fall, he didn't lose, but deep down a voice he tried to silence whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was already falling. Paul's report raised more questions than it answered. Abigail Harper wasn't just a successful philanthropist, she was a master strategist. The file detailed her ties to global NGOs, her influence on education and healthcare policies, and even a partnership with a Silicon Valley giant funding social innovation. But what struck him most was her lack of flash. Unlike Victor, who thrived on headlines, Abigail worked behind the scenes, forging alliances that didn't need cameras to hold strong. She's respected, Mr. Grayson, Paul said, handing over the final report in a quiet Coral Gables cafe. Not because she demands it, but because she earns it. People trust her, and in her world, trust is worth more than cash. Victor flipped through the pages, his coffee going cold. He'd hoped to find vulnerabilities, something to leverage to regain control, but what he found was a woman he no longer recognized, or worse, a woman he'd never truly known. And the money? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Who's bankrolling all this? Paul shrugged. Some from anonymous donors, some from corporate partnerships, but she's a major contributor herself. Seems she invested the divorce settlement wisely. That hit like a gut punch. Victor had always assumed Abigail took the settlement out of resignation, that she needed him to sustain her lifestyle. Now he saw she'd used every dollar as a brick in building something far grander. Back at the penthouse, Victor found Chloe getting ready for a fashion brand event. She stood before the mirror, trying on a gold dress that seemed designed to dazzle. You coming? She asked with little enthusiasm. He shook his head. Work. She rolled her eyes but didn't push. Truth was, Victor didn't want to be seen with her, not while the gala gossip still lingered. Chloe, meanwhile, seemed less invested in him. Her Instagram posts barely mentioned Victor now, and she was spotted with other powerful men, figures who still had the shine Victor felt fading. He didn't confront her. He didn't have the energy. Instead, he sat on the balcony, bourbon in hand, and gazed at the city he thought he owned. Miami's skyline, with its towers he'd helped raise, now felt indifferent, as if it didn't care who stood at the top. He grabbed his phone and, almost impulsively, searched Abigail's name. The news was a parade of achievements. Abigail Harper unveils scholarship program for inner-city youth. Horizon Hope Foundation expands to the Midwest. Abigail Harper wins Global Impact Award. In one photo, she was in a Liberty City community center, surrounded by kids who looked at her with awe. Her smile was genuine, free of the posturing Victor linked to high society events. He shut off his phone, but the image lingered. That night, he dreamed of Abigail, Not as she was now, but as she was in the beginning, when they shared a cramped condo in Midtown and dreamed of the future. In the dream, she laughed, sharing stories from her meetings with activists, while he listened, captivated. He woke with an ache in his chest, the kind that doesn't explain itself, only consumes. The next day, he decided to act. He couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. He called Rachel and asked her to set up a meeting with anyone influential who could reconnect him to the social scene. "And I want everything on Horizon Hope's projects," he added. "If Abigail's playing, I need to know the rules." Rachel nodded, but there was caution in her tone. "Victor, maybe it's time to rethink your approach. Going head-to-head with her might not be the best move." He cut her off. "I don't compete, Rachel. I win." But the words rang hollow, even to him. Meanwhile, his empire was fracturing. One of his flagship projects, a commercial complex on Biscayne Boulevard, hit snags with environmental permits. Rumors swirled that an NGO, backed by Horizon Hope, was behind the scrutiny. Victor had no proof, but he didn't need it. He knew it was Abigail. She didn't need to face him directly. She was dismantling his world with surgical precision, without ever raising her voice. One evening, he attended a business dinner, dragged by Rachel to keep up appearances. The event was at a chic restaurant in the design district, and Victor went alone, something he'd avoided since the divorce. He sat with other tycoons, men he'd known for years, but the conversation felt strained. They talked markets, politics, but Victor felt the glances, the pauses, the unasked questions. At one point, an old friend, a hedge fund manager named Derek, brought up Horizon Hope. "That Abigail Harper's something else, huh? Turned that foundation into a global player, and so quietly. You must be proud, Vic." The tone was friendly, but there was a hint of sarcasm. Victor forced a smile. She's always been committed. But inside, he seethed. Proud. He didn't feel pride. He felt anger, envy, and something deeper, something he didn't want to name. Regret. Back home, he found a text from Chloe. "In LA with friends. Back next week." He didn't reply. For the first time, he realized he didn't care. Chloe was a prop, a reflection of what he wanted to be but wasn't anymore. He sat in the dark, the penthouse's silence amplifying his thoughts. Abigail hadn't just survived the divorce, she'd thrived, and he, the man who thought he'd left her behind, was starting to see that maybe he was the one left behind. Across town, Abigail was in a meeting at Horizon Hope's headquarters, a sleek space in downtown Miami she'd helped design. The room buzzed with young community leaders, educators, and NGO partners. Abigail, in a simple blazer and loose hair, spoke with a contained but infectious passion. "Our next goal is tech labs in underserved neighborhoods. We're not just teaching coding. We want these kids to create, innovate, tell their own stories." The faces around the table nodded, inspired. No one saw her as Victor Grayson's ex-wife. She was Abigail Harper, the woman who turned ideas into reality. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind, studying a model of a community center set to open in Overtown. Her phone buzzed with a text from a friend. "Victor's digging into you. Think he's lost." Abigail read it and smiled, not with malice, but with the calm of someone who knew exactly where she stood. She didn't need to get back at Victor. The life she'd built, the people she helped, the purpose that drove her. That was more than enough. She pocketed her phone and got back to work, unaware that miles away, Victor stared into the void, wondering how he'd lost control of a story he thought he wrote. The rain fell on Miami like a silver veil, turning the streets into mirrors reflecting the skyscrapers and the chaos of traffic. Victor Grayson was in his penthouse, windows open, letting the storm's sound invade the stifling silence. He held a bourbon glass but didn't drink. The liquid just swirled in his hands, mirroring his restless mind. The past weeks had been a dance of denial. He'd tried to convince himself the gala was a fluke, a temporary glitch in his rise. But the truth was relentless, like the rain outside. He was losing ground. Invitations dwindled, investors wavered, and even his staff treated him with forced respect, as if they feared his house of cards might collapse. Chloe, once his glittering shadow, was barely around. Her texts were brief, vague, and her social media showed her at events Victor didn't even know about. He didn't blame her. She was young, fueled by the glow of attention, and he, at 47, was starting to look like a fading star. But what haunted him wasn't Chloe's absence. It was Abigail. Her image, calm and commanding, was everywhere, in the news, online, in overheard conversations. She wasn't the woman he'd left behind. She was Abigail Harper, the force behind Horizon Hope, the woman who changed lives while he struggled to hold on to his image. Victor tried to fight back. He threw a gala in his own name, a lavish affair at the Setai, with invitations sent to every big name who still took his calls. He wanted to prove he was still a player, that the Horizon Hope snub didn't define him. But the event was a flop masked as a win. Guests showed up, but many bailed last minute, and those who came seemed more curious about his downfall than his achievements. A reporter with a sly grin asked during cocktails, "Victor, how's it feel watching your ex-wife shine so bright? They're calling her Miami's new queen." He laughed it off, but inside the ground shook. That night he went home alone, the echo of fake laughter ringing in his ears. Chloe didn't show. She was at a jewelry brand event, posting stories with a famous DJ. Victor opened a bottle of wine, but it tasted sour, like everything around him. He sat on the couch, phone in hand, and almost without thinking, visited Horizon Hope's website. There was Abigail, in a promo video, talking about a new affordable housing initiative. Her voice was steady, warm, her eyes alight with a conviction he hadn't seen in years. "We don't build homes," she said. "We build futures." He stopped the video, but her words stuck, like a nail driven into his mind. The next morning he decided he had to face her, not with anger or schemes, but with honesty. He didn't know if he wanted to apologize, explain, or just understand how she'd done it, how she'd gone from his shadow to center stage. He called Horizon Hope's office, expecting another brush-off, but to his shock the assistant scheduled a meeting. "Ms. Harper can see you tomorrow at 2 p.m., the voice said. Victor hung up, his heart racing. He didn't know what to expect, but for the first time in months he felt something beyond rage or despair, hope. The next day he arrived at the Foundations building, a modern structure in downtown Miami with wide windows and a vibe that blended efficiency and warmth. The receptionist led him to a meeting room where Abigail waited. She stood by a model of a community center, wearing a gray blazer and a pencil skirt that made her seem both approachable and untouchable. When he entered, she turned and their eyes met. There was no hostility in her gaze, but no warmth either. It was as if she saw him not as an ex-husband, but as a stranger. "Victor," she said, her voice even. "Have a seat." He complied, feeling oddly small in a room she commanded so effortlessly. "I'm not here to fight," he started, the words more tentative than he'd planned. "I just need to understand. How did you do this? How did you become all this?" He gestured vaguely at the room, the model, the invisible empire she'd built. Abigail smiled, but it was a restrained, almost wistful smile. "Do you really want to know, Victor? Or do you just want to know how to take back what you think you lost?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. She went on, not waiting. "I didn't do this to prove anything to you. I did it for me. For years I lived in your shadow, trying to be the wife you wanted, the partner who didn't get in your way. But I lost myself in that. When you left me, I had no choice but to find myself again." Victor felt a tightness in his chest. He wanted to argue, to say she was never in his shadow, that he valued her, but the words would have rung false, even to him. Abigail continued, her voice steady, free of bitterness. "I went back to who I was before you. The woman who believed in changing the world, not just decorating it. Every project, every partnership, every life we touch here. That's who I am. And you, Victor, who are you now?" The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because for the first time he didn't know. The meeting ended without promises or reconciliation. Abigail was courteous but distant, and when he left the building, the rain had stopped, leaving a grey sky that mirrored his soul. He wandered the streets of downtown, aimless, replaying her words. Who are you now? He'd built a fortune, a name, an image, but what was left when the lights went out? He thought of Chloe, her vibrant but empty youth, the friends who drifted away, the projects that faltered. He thought of Abigail not as the woman he'd known, but as the woman she'd become, someone who didn't need applause to know her worth. That night, he didn't go back to the penthouse. He ended up at a dive bar in Little Havana, a place where no one would know him. Sitting at the counter, he ordered a coffee, something he hadn't done in years. The bartender, a middle-aged guy with a thick Cuban accent, asked, "You okay, man? You look like you're carrying the world." Victor laughed, a dry but genuine laugh. "Something like that," he said. He spent hours there, talking with the bartender about nothing and everything: baseball, life, choices. For the first time in a long time, he felt human. Not a tycoon, not a headline, just a man trying to figure out where he'd gone wrong. Meanwhile, Abigail was at a Horizon Hope event, the opening of a tech lab in Liberty City. She cut the ribbon alongside local teens, their faces lit with smiles worth more than any award. Later, she spoke, stressing the need to amplify unheard voices. "We're not defined by what we lose," she said, her conviction electrifying the crowd. "We're defined by what we build with what's left." The audience cheered, but Abigail wasn't after cheers. She was after impact. When the event wrapped, she stayed to chat with the kids, listening to their ideas, their dreams. A 16-year-old girl with bright braids said, "You're like a superhero, you know?" Abigail laughed, touched. "No, sweetie. I'm just someone who didn't give up." That night, as she drove home, Abigail glanced out the car window, the city blurring past in a haze of lights. She thought of Victor, not with anger but with a twinge of sadness. He could have been part of this if he'd chosen differently, but she couldn't carry his choices. She had her own, and they were taking her places she'd never dreamed of. Victor, meanwhile, started to shift, however haltingly. He scrapped the next flashy event Rachel had planned, saying he wanted something low-key. He began reading about Horizon Hope's work, not to rival it, but to understand. And in a move he couldn't quite explain, he made an anonymous donation to one of Abigail's programs, a small act that brought a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know if he was seeking redemption or just a new path, but for the first time, he was willing to try. The rain returned, but it felt less heavy now, as if it were washing away something old, making room for something new. And somewhere in the city, Abigail pressed forward, building a future that didn't depend on the past but transformed it into strength. The morning in Miami dawned with a sky so clear it looked painted, a stark contrast to the weeks of rain that had weighed on the city and on Victor Grayson's heart. He woke early, unusual for a man who lately hid from the daylight. The penthouse, with its marble walls and furniture screaming wealth, felt less sterile that morning, maybe because Victor was starting to see it not as a prize, but as a space where he could, at last, try to be more than a headline. He put on a dress shirt without a tie, skipped the pomade, and for the first time in years, made his own coffee. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, bringing a simplicity he'd forgotten. As he sipped, watching the city stir below, he thought of Abigail, not with the anger or envy that had consumed him post-gala, but with a blend of respect and curiosity. Their meeting days earlier had planted a seed he didn't fully grasp. Her words, "Who are you now?" rang as both a challenge and an invitation. For the first time, Victor wanted to answer that question, not for her but for himself. He spent the next days in a different rhythm. He cancelled pointless meetings, turned down invites to ego-stroking events, and started reading. Not the financial reports or business mags piling up on his desk, but books on social impact, stories of people who changed the world without chasing applause. He revisited Horizon Hope's website, not to compete, but to learn. Abigail's projects, tech labs in poor neighborhoods, adult literacy programs, community centers offering everything from daycare to entrepreneurship workshops, were more than charity. They were a declaration of hope, a reminder that real power lay in transforming, not dominating. Victor jotted down notes, rough ideas sparked in quiet moments. He thought about how he could use his expertise, his network, his wealth, for something beyond erecting towers. For the first time, he considered that his legacy could be more than steel and glass. But he knew he couldn't just mimic Abigail. She was authentic, driven by an inner purpose. He had to find his own. Meanwhile, Abigail was busier than ever. Horizon Hope had grown so much, it now had branches in Chicago, Atlanta, and Seattle, each led by young advocates she mentored. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings, community visits, and international events, where she represented not just the foundation, but the U.S. as a whole. At a conference in San Francisco, she spoke on investing in education to bridge inequalities, and her speech was so powerful it went viral online. Abigail Harper is the future, a New York Times op-ed declared. But to Abigail, the future wasn't abstract. It was the grin of a kid in Liberty City learning to code, the gratitude of a single mom who landed a job after a foundation course, the spark of a community finding its strength. She didn't think of Victor anymore. He was part of a past she respected, but didn't define her. Her life was full now, not of revenge or resentment, but of purpose. And that made her happy in a way she'd never thought possible during the years she was just Victor Grayson's wife. One night, while going over reports in her office, Abigail got an unexpected email. It was from Victor. The subject read, "A talk." She paused, the cursor hovering over the message. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to move forward without looking back. But another part, the one that still believed people could change, made her open it. "Abigail," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness or trust, but I want you to know I'm trying to be someone different. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I want to try. I'd like to talk, not to rewrite the past, but to learn how I can build something better going forward. If you're willing, I'll be at the News Cafe on Ocean Drive tomorrow at 5 p.m. No pressure, just a chance." Abigail read it 3 times, each word carrying a weight she hadn't expected. She didn't reply right away. She slept on it, and the next morning, over coffee with her team, decided she'd go. Not for him, but for herself. She wanted to close that chapter, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The News Cafe was buzzing, filled with the chatter of tourists and the scent of fresh coffee. Victor arrived early, picking a corner table away from the windows. He was nervous, a feeling he hadn't had since his first deals decades ago. When Abigail walked in, he almost didn't recognize her. Not because she'd changed, but because she seemed even more herself, confident, serene, with a spark in her eyes that didn't rely on anyone. She sat, ordered an espresso, and looked at him. "What do you want, Victor?" The question was direct, but not hostile. He took a deep breath, the words he'd rehearsed now feeling inadequate. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice steady but raw. "Not just for what I did, but for who I was. I diminished you, Abigail. I saw you as a prop, not the incredible woman you always were. I was wrong. I don't expect this to change anything between us, but I had to say it." Abigail listened quietly, her eyes locked on his. When he finished, she sipped her espresso before answering. "I made peace with your choices a long time ago, Victor. I don't hold grudges, but your apology isn't for me. It's for you. What you do with it is what matters now." He nodded, feeling the weight of her truth. "I want to do something worthwhile," he said. "Something like what you do. Not to compete, but because I see now what really counts." The talk lasted an hour, unlike anything they'd ever shared. It wasn't about reconciliation or the past. It was about possibilities. Abigail didn't make promises, but suggested he start small, maybe supporting a local cause, learning from those already making a difference. When they parted, there were no hugs or pledges, but a quiet understanding. Victor left the cafe feeling lighter, as if he'd shed a burden he'd carried for years. Abigail returned to the foundation with a peace she didn't know she needed. She didn't need his forgiveness, but seeing him try, even clumsily, was a reminder that the world was full of second chances, not for her, but for those who chose to seize them. In the months that followed, Victor began to change. He sold off parts of his portfolio, freeing up funds to back social projects. He started with a donation to a job training program in Overtown, keeping his name out of the press. He attended NGO meetings, listening more than speaking, learning from people he'd once overlooked. Chloe, seeing he was no longer the trophy she wanted to flaunt, moved on, and Victor didn't try to stop her. He was starting to realize happiness came not from being seen, but from doing something that mattered. Abigail, meanwhile, soared to new heights. Horizon Hope launched a global initiative, linking marginalized communities worldwide, and she was invited to speak at the UN. In her speech, she didn't mention her past, but spoke of resilience, of how the greatest wins come from within. "No one can take away who you are," she said, and the audience gave her a standing ovation. Back in Miami, she opened a cultural center in Overtown, a vibrant space where kids danced, painted, and dreamed. At a celebration one night, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and local youth, Abigail looked at the starry sky and felt a happiness so deep it seemed to overflow. She didn't need revenge or validation. She'd built her own world, and it was more beautiful than anything she'd left behind. Victor, miles away, watched the opening on TV, a faint smile on his lips. He wasn't there, and he didn't need to be. He was starting his own journey, inspired by a woman who unknowingly had changed not just the world, but him too. So, what did you think of this story? I hope you were moved by Abigail and Victor's journeys, each finding their path in such different human ways.
I hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Let me know in the comments below. Your feedback inspires more epic tales.